Coming up on New Day at Arirang, North Korea held a military parade in Pyongyang on Monday evening to mark the 90th founding anniversary of the Korean People's Revolutionary Army. All eyes are on whether the North showcased a new weapon. Russia said Monday that it's investigating the cause of a massive fire that erupted at an oil storage facility in the Russian city of Bryansk. Unconfirmed reports say the fire was the result of a Ukrainian missile strike. Social media giant Twitter announced Monday it has agreed to sell the company to Tesla CEO Elon Musk for a deal worth $44 billion. The deal was unanimously approved by Twitter's board and is expected to close later this year.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Tuesday, April 26, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea, and I'm Woo Soo-young.
And I'm Lee Seung-jae. Thanks again for joining us this morning, because over the next hour or so, we'll be giving you some of the biggest headlines of the day and experts' insights on key issues facing Korea and, of course, the rest of the world. Now, our top story this morning, North Korea reportedly held a large-scale military parade on Monday to commemorate the 90th anniversary of the founding of the People's Army.
A large goose-stepping event was, of course, anticipated, and there's been speculation that the parade would include a range of flashy military equipment and new weaponry and thousands of personnel. And for more, we have our Lee Dae-yeon on the line for us. Dae-yeon, can you fill us in on the details, please?
That's right, Soo-young. As you mentioned, North Korea appears to have staged a large-scale military parade on Monday night to celebrate 90 years since the foundation of the People's Army. This is a key event for North Korea. According to South Korean military officials, North Korea held a pre-event ceremony last night at around 9 p.m. with a military parade, including with military vehicles and troops, starting an hour later near Kim Il-sung Square. However, North Korean media has yet to report on the parade, and whether leader Kim Jong-un attended the event is so far unknown. This marks the fourth time since October 2020 that North Korea has held a large-scale event at night. Some analysts say North Korea's night parades are an effort to avoid being seen by reconnaissance satellites and are effective in forming a dramatic atmosphere with lights and fireworks. Meanwhile, South Korean authorities estimate the military parade to be the largest in Pyongyang's history. Earlier last week, one military source reported that North Korea had been making preparations for the parade, which included range of military equipment, such as armored vehicles and transporter erector launchers used to fire missiles. As many as 20,000 military personnel were also spotted during the preparations. The parade is also getting much attention as Pyongyang's latest military assets are likely to be revealed. Analysts say that the North is likely to have showcased its latest intercontinental ballistic missile capable of carrying multiple warheads, as well as its submarine-launched ballistic missiles. That's all I have for now. Back to you guys at the studio.
Thank you very much for that, Deha. Now, in other news, a U.S. government commission says that the state of religious freedom in North Korea remains among the worst in the world, recommending that Washington designates the regime as a country of particular concern.
In its annual report, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom explained that followers of religion in the North are severely prosecuted. It also urged the U.S. to bring up the issue of human rights during security negotiations with Pyongyang. The report provides country-specific recommendations to the U.S. Department of State, which in turn publishes its own annual report on religious freedom. Russia says it will launch a probe into the cause of fires that broke out at oil depots located near the Ukrainian border. Meanwhile, Russian forces have reportedly bombed 5 train stations across Ukraine, which resulted in casualties. Kim Yo-sun has more.
Russia says it would investigate the cause of a large fire at 2 oil storage facilities in the city of Bryansk, located some 150 kilometers northeast of its border with Ukraine. Saying the fire erupted early Monday morning, Moscow's Ministry of Energy Situations added nobody had been hurt in the incident. One of the 2 facilities is located on a military base that supplies troops for fighting in Donbas, while the other is linked to a pipeline that's used to supply Europe. There was no immediate comment from Ukraine regarding the incident. Meanwhile, in Mariupol, Russia said Monday it will open a humanitarian corridor to allow civilians trapped in the city to evacuate. However, Ukraine says no agreement has yet been reached on the matter. On the same day, Russia bombed 5 railway stations in central and western Ukraine, reportedly killing at least 5 people. Ukrainian media explained that the strikes came just hours after America's top officials visited the country's capital city via train. The news is seen as a warning to the West as it comes on the heels of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Blinken and Austin pledged over $322 million worth of new military assistance to Ukraine, taking the total U.S. security assistance since Moscow's invasion to about $3.7 billion. Kim Yeo-sun, Arirang News.
At a farewell press conference, outgoing President Moon Jae-in said that his recent exchange of letters with the North Korean leader was intended to help maintain the momentum for peace. He also commented on the recent controversy over prosecution reform, stressing the need for agreement by related parties. Yoon Jung-min reports.
President Moon Jae-in says his recent exchange of letters with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was aimed at keeping the path to peace open for the next administration. Speaking at his farewell press conference on Monday, the president said the letters were intended to preserve the atmosphere of peace and dialogue on the Korean peninsula.
한반도의 평화 그리고 또 한반도의 대화 분위기 이런 것이 계속되고 다음 정부로 이어지게끔 하기 위한 그런 차원의 노력으로 봐주시기 바랍니다.
Moon also discussed the recent controversy over stripping the prosecution of its power to conduct investigations, saying he thinks it's right for that power to be separated from the power to bring charges. He said he is in favor of the compromise reached by lawmakers last week, mediated by Speaker Park Byung-seok, emphasizing concessions by each side. This comes after the People Power Party on Monday announced that it wants to renegotiate last week's agreement with the Democratic Party. President Moon stressed the importance of agreement and public support on the issue.
국회에서도 논의가 필요하고 가능하면 합의하에 처리가 되면 더 좋고 또 검찰과 경찰 간에도 또 협의들이 필요하고요.
In an interview with local broadcaster JTBC, which aired on Monday, President Moon said the heaviest burden for him was the real estate issue, adding that housing prices have started to stabilize around the end of his term. He said the increase in real estate prices is a global phenomenon, and South Korea has seen a relatively small increase. On the pandemic, he said he felt sorry for the suffering of small business owners, but added that the government has done its best to help them financially by making compensation into law. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Now, in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, South Korea's incoming president emphasized the importance of relationship with Washington and Tokyo. Now, this as Yoon Suk-yeol has a delegation traveling to Japan to meet top officials there, while having already sent another delegation to the U.S. Kim Do-yeon provides a glimpse of what to expect.
South Korean President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol is expressing a determination to strengthen ties with the U.S. and Japan. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal published on Monday, he also said continuing tensions between the U.S. and China could be both an opportunity and a risk. His plans to strengthen ties with Japan also come at a sensitive time. For the past few years, ties between Seoul and Tokyo have been cool because of issues related to history. The Japanese government, in an apparent retaliation, imposed trade restrictions in 2019, when South Korea's top court ordered Japanese companies to compensate the surviving Korean victims of wartime forced labor. Yoon said in his campaign that he will improve ties with Japan. In fact, the second delegation he sent overseas for policy consultations was to Japan. They've been there since Sunday, led by lawmaker Chung Jin-seok. On Monday, they met with Japan's ministers of foreign affairs, economy, and defense to discuss future cooperation. It's expected they'll meet on Wednesday with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, to whom Chung will deliver a personal letter from President-elect Yoon.
The president-elect believes that repairing the relationship between the two countries from its current low, neglected state would be more beneficial to the nation.
Yoon's first delegation was sent to the United States a couple of weeks ago. On Monday, in a report on their trip, they said the two sides agreed that the sooner a summit is arranged with President Biden, the better, and an in-person meeting between the presidents will be an important starting point for the relationship. Local media and the Wall Street Journal also reported that Biden could stop by Seoul in late May, just before his scheduled meeting in Japan with other leaders of the Quad countries. According to the delegation, the two countries agreed on the need for the existing alliance to be elevated into a comprehensive strategic alliance, which would mean their bilateral ties would expand beyond military and regional security issues into economy and technology. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
It's now time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Led by Chung Jin-seok, President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol sent a delegation to Japan to improve ties between the two neighboring countries.
That's right. However, with historical disputes being the main reason for frayed tensions between the two countries, will Yoon's delegation be able to find resolution? Now, for insights on the delegation's trip to Tokyo, we connect with Dr. Choi Eun-mi, Research Fellow at Asan Institute for Policy Studies, Center for Regional Studies. Dr. Choi, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hello, thank you for having me today.
So, Dr. Choi, first and foremost, let's talk a bit more about this 7-member delegation. Why were they chosen specifically to lead the talks over in Tokyo?
While the 7 members chosen for the delegation clearly show the direction of the next administration's diplomacy was Japan and its agenda for discussion. The 7 members consist of politicians, bureaucrats, and scholars. First of all, Chung Jin-seok is the delegation leader and South Korea's National Assembly Deputy Speaker. And Kim Seok-ki is the deputy chief of the delegation and is the vice chair of the Korea-Japan Parliamentary Diplomacy Forum. The two politicians are the senior lawmaker in People's Power Party, and they have well-established political network with Japan. And also, the 3 scholars are experts in Japan, North Korea, and the United States, respectively. At the same time, they also have well-established academic and policy networks with Japan and the U.S. While the former ambassador Kang Ho-jin worked in the Lee Myung-bak administration and the former ambassador Lee Sang-dok worked in the Park Geun-hye administration. Among the 7 members, Ambassador Lee Sang-dok's involvement in the delegation was controversial because he involved in the negotiation of the agreement on comfort women issue in 2015, which was one of the most controversial issues between Korea and Japan and widely opposed at home. But I think the new government showed its willingness to discuss the historical issue with Japan.
And that leads to my next question, Dr. Chair. Now, historical issues, they were one of the main reasons that relations between Seoul and Tokyo got so bad in recent years. And, well, do you think these sensitive issues are going to be addressed during the delegation's trip, or do you think the two parties are going to sort of avoid things for now?
Well, I don't think these issues will be avoided because these are the biggest issues of the Korea and Japan conflict. Rather, it's more difficult to avoid mentioning conflict issues such as comfort women, forced labor, export regulation, and gsomia. Also, the Japanese government may wonder what position the new government has on the issues. I think more than anyone else, the delegation knows that not mentioning the issues will cause people to question the government's sincerity of improving relations between Korea and Japan. However, it will be difficult to come up with a solution immediately or reach an agreement that both sides can be satisfied with. Even though Korea and Japan hope to improve relations, the difference between their respective positions is vast. The Japanese government has not changed its position that the Korean government should resolve the issues. Moreover, the delegation does not have the authority to present an agreement or negotiate. The delegation is also making this clear. Nevertheless, I think it is a meaningful start for the delegation to put the issues on the table and show the diplomatic direction of new government at this point, at this visit.
I think you make a very good point. The Yoon administration eventually they do have to bring up of the past historical issues, but at least for now, I mean, they're trying to really improve ties with Japan. I think it won't be the top of the agenda when it comes to discussions on some of the issues. But aside from the historical issues, what do you think are some of the other key issues that I guess the delegation needs to bring up with the talks in Tokyo?
Well, in recently, the biggest inconvenience between Korea and Japan is the restriction of movement due to COVID-19. Of course, the spread of COVID-19 should be considered, but the revival of visa exemption and the release of quarantine obligation will be meaningful signals to the resumption of exchanges between Korea and Japan. In addition, this is a relatively easy improvement to achieve. However, I think the real signal of resolving this conflict is the removal of export regulation by Japan in 2019 and the normalization of dysomia. Even though the impact of export regulations is not great and dysomia is still maintained, but it is an unstable state and it may change at any time. It is not easy to resolve because these are all connected, but it is important to eliminate this instability between the countries. In addition, Korea, the United States, and Japan cooperation on North Korea and China is expected to be discussed, especially in light of the Ukraine crisis. Although it will be difficult to resolve the current conflict issues at this visit, I think it will show a willingness to restore Korea and Japan relations.
And Dr. Chair, well, Japan's media and its foreign ministry certainly seem to have given a very positive response to all these developments regarding the incoming administration. But in terms of the two leaders meeting, do you see it happening anytime soon?
Yeah. Although Korea and Japan have been in conflict throughout history, the relations between the two countries is very important in terms of security, economy, and values. First is security. Korea and Japan can respond to threats from North Korea and China in cooperation with the United States. Second is economy. The countries are important trading partners for each other. And lastly, improving relations between Korea and Japan is a way to protect the values of market economy and liberal democracy. In many fields, the two countries are connected and help each other. In the sense, relations between the two countries are too important to give up because of historical conflict.
Afraid all the time that we have right now, and of course we'll get some more results of this once the delegation does return. Dr. Chad, thank you very much for joining us today with your insights and looking forward to talking to you again in the future.
Okay, thank you.
President-elect Yoon's transition team is now fine-tuning its priority projects. First, a roadmap for fostering future industries, including tech, bio and space, has been proposed. Now the key is finding ways to allow small companies and startups to lead these sectors. Lee Young-in has the details.
South Korea's economy thrived in the 1980s and 1990s due to its heavy steel and shipbuilding industries. The internet was key in the 20 years that followed the year 2000. Yoon's transition team says the new administration comes with the mission of generating what will feed the nation over the next 20 years.
Future industries will decide the country's fate. The importance of the fourth industrial revolution is growing more than ever, as the whole global paradigm is shifting toward to those very industries.
The committee proposed making an innovation-friendly environment centered on deregulation, market fairness that can ensure opportunities for small companies, and a safety net that can protect startups in case of failure. This way, the committee expects even if 8 out of 10 fail, the successful innovative tool can keep the industries moving forward. In particular, the new government aims to provide incentives and consulting services to existing industries for digital transformation like smart farms. At the same time, it will upgrade what South Korea is already good at, like wireless technologies. One goal is to commercialize 6G as early as 2026, at least 2 to 4 years earlier than the global standard. It will also aim for a major leap in areas where South Korea is currently behind, like bio, space, and artificial intelligence. There is extra focus on AI in line with Yoon's push for data-based digital platform government.
The goal is to open all data to the different ministries, so there will be no inconvenience in information exchange like now. Those public data will be used in the private sector, which can facilitate AI industries.
More specific plans could be announced next Tuesday when Yoon's government agendas are expected to be finalized. With so much emphasis on future industries, the committee's chair An Chol-soo had proposed Yoon that he appoints a special secretary in charge of science and education, a unique role which it says would differentiate the incoming administration from the current one. Yoon reportedly said he will consider the idea. Young-eun, Arirang News.
Now, in other news, Shanghai residents have been voicing frustrations due to China's strict lockdowns. Now, daily life disrupted and businesses face challenges despite signs of easing regulations. Now, other cities like Beijing showed a rise in confirmed cases, undermining the country's zero COVID-19 policy. Kim Ji-yeon has the latest.
Shanghai, China's most populous city, has struggled to contain an outbreak of COVID-19 and had imposed large-scale lockdowns since late March. One popular post on Weibo, a Chinese social media platform, on Saturday showed pictures of green fences in different parts of the city. It's been reposted nearly 7,000 times and is a reminder of the outrage among residents already frustrated by the city's unending harsh lockdown. Access to food, water, and medical supplies has been slow following protocol to blockade buildings. Confirmed patients were forced into quarantine centers that are not well kept, according to those who've experienced them.
The situation at the first transit facility was chaotic, unmanaged, and kept in poor condition, extremely dirty.
Lockdowns in Shanghai, China's financial hub and port city, have been the most disruptive to daily life and to foreign businesses and their supply chains, amid concerns of damaging effects to other economies. Despite authorities in Shanghai having announced a whitelist of 666 companies last week that would get priority for a resumption of work, foreign business organizations say it's still difficult to get more than half of their workers to factories due to lockdown restrictions. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, inflation and rise in key rates could lead to a setback of the global economy until next year. That's coming from a senior Moody's official during a web seminar, highlighting that even if a truce is reached between Ukraine and Russia, sanctions will continue until at least next year. The official added that inflationary shock due to the soaring raw material prices will hurt consumer sentiment, and the sanctions on Russia are likely to cause volatility in the financial markets. Now, the worst-case scenario, halting energy trade between Russia and Europe, which could lead to a global recession and a severe liquidity squeeze as geopolitical tensions continue.
It's time for Global Insights, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. As the war in Ukraine continues, Western countries and their allies have been introducing stronger sanctions on the Russian economy. But as much as the stringent sanctions on Russian entities and individuals are squeezing the Kremlin, the measures and the prolonged war are also weighing on economic conditions in Europe and around the world, including here in Asia. We discussed the growing impact of the war on economies and markets around the world. And for this, we're joined by Christopher Hartwell, Professor at the CHAW School of Management and Law, and Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Thank you both very much for joining us today. And first off, Professor Hartwell, now, President Putin has vehemently denied that sanctions on Russia's economy is working. But do you think that's true? Do you think they're working? And also, do you think further sanctions could convince him to make some concessions in this war?
Well, I think what we've seen is very important that we say what the sanctions are working towards. What is our goal? What's our metric of success? And I'd say if we want to kind of cripple the Russian war machine, then we are actually having an effect with the current crop of sanctions. It's not gone as far as it could have been in terms of an embargo on oil and gas. However, we've seen indications that the Russian war machine itself is being harmed, that there's supply chain disruptions when it comes to the parts that are needed for creating new tanks, for creating some of the high technology anti-aircraft or missile systems that they have. While we might not see so much regular life in Moscow or St. Petersburg or even places like Vladivostok or Nizhny Novgorod being affected, and I hear from friends in Moscow that life is kind of slowly returning to normal, they are starting to have bite where it matters, and especially the kind of the seizure, the freezing of Central Bank of Russia assets, which is really, really hampering the Kremlin's ability to evade any further sanctions and to kind of buy its parts elsewhere.
And Professor Hartwell, of course, supply chain disruptions and just the war situation itself, it's been driving up price levels like crazy, especially in Europe. Now, how is the war situation and the sanctions, of course, on Russia impacting daily life for people in European countries?
Well, the only way that they're really feeding through is because of the volatility that comes with kind of oil prices. They've gone up. If you think of kind of West Texas or even Brent crude, it's gone up about 75% since February. So that's an immediate price hike that is hitting people in their pocketbooks, in their wallets. Other than that, food prices are rising, but were rising beforehand. This is just kind of, when you think about the amount of wheat, the amount of grain that comes out of Russia, that comes out of Ukraine, that is going to be problematic in terms of supply chain. So there's going to be less supply, and the demand's going to be the same or higher, so prices are going to be higher. But overall, kind of prices have been rising already because of central bank responses, because of kind of COVID fiscal stimulus. So it's inaccurate to attribute most of this to kind of the Russia-Ukraine war, especially since Russia only accounts for about 3% of the global economy.
Well, it seems that global investors are also, they seem concerned all the same. And Professor Yang, now going over to you. Now, concerns over the rising prices are prompting investors to sell bonds, and that's been pushing yields higher and higher. And the yield on the benchmark 10-year Treasury note in the US, it touched 2.94% last Tuesday. And that's a level not seen since late 2018. Now, first, what do bond yields indicate about the economy? And second, do you see the increase slowing down?
Okay, well, the two-year bond rate is 2.61, and 10-year rate is 2.94. So it does seem like the market is expecting large increases in the interest rate, but in the short run, not necessarily in the long run. And also the 2.94 yield rate is substantially below the consumer price index inflation of US, which last time around was 8.5%. So they seem to expect this high inflation not to last, but also be a very short-term type of situation, which may be good news for central banks, since it indicates that the inflationary expectation has not really gone up. People still expect this inflation to be temporary rather than permanent. But they do expect the interest rate to rise very quickly and very high. Right now, the expectation seems to be that the interest rate increase will take place every FOMC meeting. There's 6 left, and at least some of them will be big steps of 0.5 percentage point and even more. And I think that is reflected in the current 2-year and 10-year bond rate. But the lack of difference between the two does seem to indicate that once the rate goes up in the near future, it will not go up even further in the longer future. So far, they only expect the interest rate rise to be more or less in the short term.
Professor Yang, as you mentioned, the US Federal Reserve expects to hike interest rates at least 6 more times in 2022, while the European Central Bank also confirmed last week that it's ending its asset purchasing program in the 3rd quarter of this year. Now, if these more aggressive rate hikes are introduced by central banks, then what's going to be the impact on Asian markets? Do you expect more sell-offs to happen?
Okay, well, I did a little bit of calculation comparing the current stock market numbers to where it was before the pandemic started, the 1st quarter of 2020, the high points of 1st quarter compared to where it is right now. And Dow is about 14% above, S&P is about 26% above, NASDAQ about 30% above, Nikkei about 10% above, Kospi about 17%, Kosdaq about 30% above where the highs used to be 2 years ago, just before the pandemic. Now, roughly you expect about 10% gain on stock per year. So that does seem to indicate that a lot of bubble has gone down. There is, for some markets like Shanghai and Hang Seng, they're lower than where it was before the pandemic. While the bubble has gone down quite a bit, just because the interest rate is rising, we will probably see additional sell-offs. It'll be very volatile for the first part of the year, but things may stabilize around the current levels once the invasion settles a bit and the bottlenecks that we see in the supply side settles down a bit. And when the U.S. does raise the interest rate, that may cut down U.S. spending, which is one of the main causes of the inflation that we see right now.
In the meantime, it seems Russian President Vladimir Putin isn't backing down. And Professor Hartwell, now earlier this month, an overwhelming majority of EU lawmakers, they demanded an immediate full embargo on Russian oil, gas and coal. But why is it so difficult to actually implement this embargo? What would sanctions on Russian energy mean for Europe?
Well, there are 3 easy answers to that, why it's so difficult. Germany, Austria, Hungary. You have 3 countries which are dead set against kind of moving forward and having this full embargo. Most of what we see, kind of the reluctance to move ahead, is because these very same countries, during the good years, as it were, didn't provision themselves at all for any kind of alternatives to Russian oil and gas. They've become more and more dependent. You know, there's that clip floating around the internet of Donald Trump at the UN saying that the Germans would become entirely dependent on Russian oil and gas, and they're just laughing it up. This is exactly what has happened. There have been no kind of moves away from Russian oil and gas. Germany is highly dependent. They are closing their nuclear power plants, and they are not even entertaining the idea that perhaps this is a bad idea and maybe they should reverse those closures. Austria has its own kind of special history when it comes with Russia, being neutral because of Soviet occupation until 1955, and of course Hungary is being led by Viktor Orban, who is very much pro-Putin. He portrays himself as pro-Hungary. He's keeping us out of the war, but in fact he is very, very pro-Putin. So the infrastructure isn't there really to kind of shift away very quickly from Russian oil and gas, mainly because of countries like Germany, Hungary, and Austria, which have made no provisions for it. It can be done. Other countries in the European Union have started to diversify. We've had Poland, Lithuania building kind of their LNG, their liquid natural gas. We see that France is kind of looking towards Qatar and looking elsewhere in the world. But as long as Germany, Austria, and Hungary are blocking it, then it's not going to go anywhere.
Well, Professor Hartwell, now governments like the UK, they've been trying to they've been trying to stem the flow of money, the Russian oligarchs' cash flow, and also they've been trying to strengthen sanctions on Russia's goods and, of course, energy as well, eventually. But how are they really preparing for the fallout that will come inevitably to their own economies?
Well, they really are. And I mean, there's not much that's going to happen when it comes to sanctioning oligarchs. I mean, we've talked about this before, that it's the common way to go. And it's mostly symbolic, that you go after these specific people who have lots of money and have ties to the regime, and then to say that they can't operate here, there, everywhere. And it matters in terms of the London real estate market, in terms of the amount of money that's gone into the London real estate market coming from Russian oligarchs and kind of associated oligarchs throughout Central Asia and even Ukraine. But I think the London real estate market can withstand a hit such as this, kind of the withdrawal of oligarch money. Otherwise, there's really not much else that's being done. Again, food prices will probably increase due to disruptions in supply chains, but I think, again, this is part of a general rising tide of prices. The only thing that the UK government or other European governments can do is, as Professor Young kind of counseled, it's monetary policy. It's increasing interest rates. It is actually accurately pricing capital, which has been mispriced for years. So, but that is going to have its own kind of consequences in terms of economic recession as the bubbles burst. And I want to add one more thing to kind of what Professor Young said, and I agree entirely. But the markets might not be expecting inflation to last that long. The inflation has already escaped. I mentioned the London real estate market. You look at the United States real estate market. You look at real estate across Europe. Now we are into asset inflation, which is where we were in 2007 and 2008. So this is the dangerous point for kind of the global economy. I don't think anyone is really taking that very seriously beyond kind of what happens with Russia and Ukraine.
But Professor Yang, well, the reality is that the Ukraine war is stretching on, and the price of food, gas and commodities, people are very worried that they're going to continue shooting up. Do you expect inflation to continue for the time being? And do you think measures like US President Biden's plan to release 60 million barrels of oil could make a difference?
Okay, well, I do expect the inflation to be worse than what the bond market expects. I think it'll last longer, but I think we will not. We have sort of hit peak inflation. I think the inflation rate will go down, but perhaps not to the levels of what the central banks want for 2% range for about maybe at least until next year, perhaps even a year afterwards. Now, will President Biden's 60 million barrels of oil make that much of a difference? Well, the world oil demand is about 89 million barrels per day. Russian exports is about 2.9 million barrels per day. So this is, if you talk about the daily demand, it's not even 1 day's demand. If you talk about Russian exports, it's about 25 days worth of Russian exports. So unless OPEC steps up and increases its production, or the demand falls significantly, which means that we will go into recession globally, I don't think the 60 million barrels just by itself will make all that much of a difference.
And adding to that, Professor Yang, well, the international banks, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, they've been downgrading their projections for the global economy, including here in the Asia region. And how are Asian economies going to be affected by the Russia-Ukraine war, particularly the South Korean economy?
Okay, well, I'm personally more concerned about food prices than oil prices because, well, oil prices, OPEC is not cooperating, but if OPEC does decide to cooperate, then we could have a relatively rapid decline in oil prices. But grain prices, because of the hit in Ukraine production as well as sanctions on Russia, and it takes about 6 months to a year to step up grain production. So this grain production, the hit in grain production will be, I think, longer lasting. And because the Asian region imports a lot of grain as well as oil, especially Korea, I think it will have a higher than average globally effect on Asian countries. But I also noticed that the latest projection by Asian +3 Macroeconomic Research Office says that they reduced the growth projection from 3.9% to 4.9% to 4.7%. That's only about 0.2 percentage point difference. Now, Korean exports, about half of Korean exports do go to Asian +3 countries, ASEAN, 10 countries plus China and Japan. But if the reduction in growth is only about 0.2 percentage points, I don't think that'll be too hard of a hit on Korea.
Well, we're out of time, I'm afraid, so this is where we must leave it today. That was Christopher Hartwell, Professor at the CHAW School of Management and Law, and Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, Twitter announced Monday that it has agreed to sell the company to Tesla CEO Elon Musk, who will purchase the social media giant in a deal valued at around $44 billion. Now, under the terms of the deal, shareholders will receive $54.20 per share, a 38% premium on the stock price on April 1st when Musk made the offer. Now, the deal was unanimously approved by Twitter's board and is expected to close later this year. Now, Twitter's stock price shot up nearly 6% following the news. Now, South Korea's top automakers posted better than expected earnings in Q1 despite chip shortages and the Ukraine crisis. Now, Hyundai Motors' estimated operating profits stood at around $1.5 billion, up more than 16% on year. Sales of around $24 billion were logged, a 10% spike from 2021. Now, they're the highest figure since the Q2 of 2014, thanks to increased sales of premium SUV models and friendly exchange rates. Now, Kia Motors also hit record highs in sales in the first quarter. In terms of operating profits, a near 50% growth on year. South Korea's exports of instant noodles have risen to new all-time highs. A key contributing factor is likely the increasing popularity of K-cultural contents around the world. Kim Sung-min sheds light on this phenomenon.
After receiving a call, Moon Kwang, the housekeeper of a luxurious mansion, quickly boils some water. She adds chopped beef into the pot to make a mouth-watering dish of noodles. After this iconic scene from the Oscar-winning film Parasite, the two different types of instant noodles, 짜파게티 and 너구리, both saw their sales surge overseas. The signature dish known as 짜파구리 is just one example of how South Korean instant noodles, or ramen, are gaining popularity around the world. With South Korean music and dramas attracting global fans and the country's cultural influence expanding, Korea's ramen exports have soared to a fresh high in March. According to the Korea Customs Service on Monday, the country exported $71.58 million of ramen in March, up 20% from a year ago. It was the first time that monthly outbound shipments of the food item surpassed the $70 million mark. The export volume also rose to a record high of over 20,000 tons, an increase of more than 17% on year. The biggest buyer of Korean noodles was China, followed by the US and Japan. In some countries, companies even started making packaging using the Korean alphabet Hangul to make it look similar to popular Korean ramen products.
One thing global viewers would come across a lot when watching Korean dramas is the characters eating ramen, so they'll be curious about it. And with K-pop becoming more popular, fans are paying attention to South Korea's culture in general as well.
He added that the low cost and high accessibility could also explain the current wave of ramen fever. Watchers say global sales of ramen could in fact be higher, as the release figure does not include sales of products produced locally by Korean firms overseas. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
For a look at news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning to you, Matthew.
Good morning to you guys.
Good morning, Matthew. Now let's start off with space travel, as an all-private astronaut team has safely returned to Earth from the International Space Station.
They have indeed, SJ. It's the first private team of astronauts to board the space station did return to Earth on Monday, splashing down off Florida's Atlantic coast after a 16-hour descent from orbit. Now led by retired NASA astronaut Michael Lopez Alegria, the multinational four-man crew completed a 2-week science mission which began on April 8th and has been hailed as a milestone for private spaceflight. The joint project was handled by Axiom Space and SpaceX and saw seat prices going for upwards of $50 to $60 million per person. The crew's return was originally set for last Wednesday, but was delayed due to unfavorable weather. 7 Greenpeace activists have been arrested by Norwegian authorities for trying to stop a tanker from delivering Russian jet fuel to Norway. In a protest against the war in Ukraine, members of the advocacy group chained themselves to the Ust-Luga tanker on Monday to prevent it from docking. According to ship tracking sites, the vessel, carrying a reported $116 million worth of jet fuel and operated by Russian gas producer Novatek, is now docked at Slagentangen port, about 85 kilometers from the capital Oslo. The ship's arrival fulfills a pre-invasion contract between Esso Norway and Russia, with the company stating that no future deals had been made since the invasion. Supermarkets in Beijing are being flooded with shoppers following a COVID-19 testing order affecting some 3.5 million people. The announcement by health authorities on Sunday sparked citywide panic buying, as residents fear a similar situation to that in Shanghai, where a 4-week lockdown has seen people struggle to source food and other essentials while locked indoors. The testing order mandates that residents in Beijing's Chaoyang province or district report for 3 coronavirus tests this week after the region recorded 26 of Beijing's 47 symptomatic cases since Friday. More than a dozen residential buildings have already been put under lockdown in the area. The world's oldest person has died at the age of 119. Confirmed by the Guinness World Records in 2019 as the oldest living person, Kane Tanaka was born in 1903 in Japan. She passed away at a hospital in Fukuoka City on April 19th, though the cause of her death has not been reported. Born in the same year as the Wright brothers' first airplane flight, she is known to have enjoyed chocolate and fizzy drinks. Her death comes as Japan faces a rapidly aging population. According to figures last September, the country had 86,510 centenarians. The current oldest woman now is believed to be Lucille Randon, a 118-year-old French nun. A dress from the film classic The Wizard of Oz could fetch more than $1 million in an auction next month. The dress, which was worn by Dorothy in the movie, will go under the hammer after it was found following a decades-long search. Originally donated in 1973 by an actress to the Catholic University of America, the dress stayed with the school's head of drama until the 1980s, at which point it disappeared. But recently, a retired professor was going through his boxes when he stumbled upon the long-lost piece. Although it's unknown exactly how many dresses were made for the movie, there are 5 dresses that have surfaced since the film's release. The current pre-sale auction estimate is $800,000 to $1.2 million, with the auction date set for May 24th in Los Angeles. Another version of the dress that was sold in 2015 fetched $1.5 million.
Good morning. Rain has let up in the capital, but elsewhere is waking up to a rainy Tuesday. It has been raining heavily on Jeju and south coastal areas, and it will continue to pour down in coastal areas in Gyeongsang-namdo and Jeju Island, with a heavy rain advisory issued on Jeju. Well, the resort island could see 20 to 60 millimeters, along with strong gusts, with a wind advisory also issued on Jeju, as well as Ulsan, Busan, and Gyeongsang-namdo province this morning, but rain should let up by the late afternoon. Temperatures in the south will not go up that much. Highs will be 5 to 7 degrees lower this afternoon, while central regions will notice much warmer highs this afternoon with brighter skies. It's a refreshing start with blue skies for the capital region, but it's a rough morning for southern provinces, especially for those on Jeju Island. The highs could soar to 28 degrees by the afternoon in Seoul with high humidity, so it could feel a bit muggy in the capital. Then temperatures will return to the normal range tomorrow. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that concludes our newscast this morning, but we will be back at the same time tomorrow for our Wednesday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
But do stick around for more updates throughout the day. Thanks as always for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day, and as always, take care.
환영합니다. 웰컴 투 대구.
Bienvenue 대구.
하이 라이 따지오.
대구니 요코소.
알람피 대구.
Bienvenido a 대구.
Welcome you all. For the first time in Korea, the largest conference ever, the